Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never thought a simple company party could make me feel so invisible. I'm Oliver, 38, and my wife, Felicity, has always had this habit of underestimating my ability to read between the lines. That night, she leaned in as we stepped into the crowded room, swirling glasses and laughter around us. Her lips curved in a mischievous smile, and she whispered, "Just pretend we're friends." I nodded, of course, because I've always trusted her judgment, but inside, something stirred. A quiet unease I couldn't shake. The room was buzzing with chatter, colleagues exchanging polite nods and jokes. Felicity drifted toward her circle, leaving me with a choice: follow her into her laughter or stay on the sidelines. I chose the latter, though I didn't yet realize it would be the decision that changed how I saw her and myself. That's when I noticed her boss, Marigold, standing alone near the corner of the room. She was petite, with sharp amber eyes that seemed to scan the crowd with a quiet intelligence. Her hair was dyed a subtle rose gold, and the way she adjusted her glasses suggested she was someone who noticed everything yet said very little. Most people would have ignored her, but something about the loneliness radiating from her silhouette drew me in. I walked over, my hands lightly brushing my pockets as if I had somewhere else to be. She looked up and smiled. A small, knowing smile that didn't need words. "Oliver, right?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. I nodded, a little caught off guard. "I'm Marigold. I don't think we've met properly before." We began talking slowly at first. Small talk, the usual office chatter. Yet her presence had this subtle warmth that made it easy to talk. She laughed at the things I said, not because she had to, but because she genuinely did. Felicity was across the room, deep in conversation, animated, her laughter rising above the music. I watched her for a moment and felt a pang. Not jealousy exactly, more like a quiet disappointment. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. It was the feeling that maybe, in this moment, she didn't notice me at all. Marigold's voice pulled me back. "You're easy to talk to," she said. It wasn't flirtation. It was a statement, almost observational, and yet it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I realized then that I hadn't felt this kind of connection in a long time, not with Felicity at least. There had always been this unspoken barrier between us, small cracks of neglect I had ignored because I believed in the marriage, in the vows we'd made over a decade ago. But sitting there with Marigold, I understood something important. Intimacy isn't always physical. Sometimes it's simply being seen. We moved through the conversation, sharing stories of trivial office chaos, favorite books, a bit of music we liked, and the more we talked, the lighter I felt. It was disarming. I laughed freely, genuinely, something I hadn't realized I had stopped doing around Felicity. And yet, underneath the laughter, there was this subtle tension, a quiet question echoing. How long had it been since I felt like this with her? At some point, the night grew later, and Felicity wandered over, noticing us chatting. Her eyes flicked between me and Marigold, but her expression didn't give anything away. I smiled at her politely, a simple gesture of courtesy, and she returned it with a slight nod before retreating back to her group. That was the moment I realized the party wasn't really about her anymore. It was about me noticing a connection I had been starved of for years. Marigold mentioned a new project she was passionate about, and I found myself leaning in, genuinely interested, fully engaged. Felicity's absence in the conversation wasn't a void. It was a revelation. I began to see how little attention I had been receiving in our marriage, not just that night, but over months, maybe years. It wasn't dramatic or violent. It was subtle, silent, the kind of neglect that makes you question yourself without ever giving you an answer. By the time the music slowed and the night drew toward its end, I realized I had made a choice without fully understanding it. I had chosen presence over pretense. I had chosen to sit beside someone who saw me, even if it was only for a few hours. Felicity didn't notice, or perhaps she did, but in that fleeting glance, I understood something fundamental about myself. I still craved attention, validation, and the kind of connection that makes you feel alive. I left the party feeling lighter, Yet there was this lingering tension, a quiet question I couldn't shake. Felicity and I had spent years in a comfortable pattern of familiarity. But comfort isn't the same as closeness. And that night, as I walked to my car, I understood that sometimes noticing someone else's presence makes you realize just how absent the one you've known the longest really is. The next morning, I woke up to the same house that had always felt like ours. Yet for the first time, it felt strangely empty. Felicity was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared coffee, and for a moment I wondered if I should say something about last night, about the quiet distance that had grown between us. But the words stuck somewhere in my throat, and I realized I didn't have the energy, or perhaps the desire, to confront her. Not yet. Work the next day felt heavier. Every email, every small meeting, reminded me of Marigold's calm presence, her genuine attentiveness. I kept replaying the night in my head, how her laughter had felt like a lifeline, how the simple act of being acknowledged made me feel human again. I didn't want to think of it as temptation, it wasn't that. It was clarity. It was a mirror showing me what I'd been missing, and more importantly, what I deserved. A week later, Felicity mentioned a new team assignment over breakfast. Her words were casual, light, almost oblivious to the way I had been internally unraveling and stitching myself back together. I listened quietly, nodded, offered minor comments, but inside, I was aware of a subtle shift. I was no longer the man who silently accepted being sidelined. There was a new awareness in my chest, a quiet determination that hadn't been there before. Then came a casual Tuesday evening at work. I walked past Marigold's office, and she was alone, sorting papers with that same quiet focus that had drawn me in weeks earlier. Our eyes met, and for a second, there was no pretense, no office hierarchy, just recognition. She smiled, small but warm, and it was enough to remind me that connection isn't something you demand. It's something rare, and when you find it, it should never be taken lightly. The next company event wasn't a grand party like the first. It was a small networking night. Felicity drifted into the room as usual, her presence commanding attention from others. I found myself observing her differently now, not with resentment, but with detached curiosity. She hadn't changed. I had, and that made all the difference. During the evening, I again gravitated toward Marigold. We spoke about projects, about life outside the office, and even about small, inconsequential details that somehow felt weighty. Felicity noticed our interaction, her eyes narrowing slightly, a micro-expression I couldn't ignore. I felt no guilt, no shame, only awareness. I was present, truly present, and I realized that for years, I hadn't been this kind of presence in my own life. I had been accommodating, patient, sometimes invisible to my own needs. By the end of the night, I walked home alone, the cool air brushing against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt fully awake. The silence of the streets mirrored the quiet inside me, a reflective calm that wasn't born out of anger or resentment, but out of understanding. Felicity and I existed in the same world, yet our realities had diverged subtly but irrevocably. I had choices now, choices that I hadn't fully recognized before. Over the next few weeks, small moments continued to reveal the cracks in our relationship. Conversations felt forced, touches fleeting, and laughter rare. Yet, at the same time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Self-respect. I no longer sought her approval or attention. I no longer measured my worth by her engagement. I had realized that intimacy isn't about proximity or marriage certificates. It's about recognition, empathy, and shared presence. Felicity could choose distance. I could choose awareness. One rainy evening, we were in the living room, the kind of quiet where words often failed. Felicity glanced at me, something unspoken flickering across her eyes, but I simply nodded. No words were necessary. I had learned that some things cannot be fixed with conversation or compromise. They can only be understood, accepted, and moved past. It wasn't long before I found myself spending more intentional time with Marigold outside of work. Coffee breaks turned into long walks, casual chats into deep conversations about dreams, ambitions, and regrets. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence, genuine, unfiltered, and reciprocated. And with that, a realization settled in. Life is too short to exist in silence, to yearn for attention that isn't given, to chase love that's no longer alive. Felicity eventually noticed my subtle detachment. She tried to pull me back with familiar phrases, reminders of past intimacy, but I remained calm. There was no anger, no confrontation, only clarity. I was no longer the man who silently waited for recognition. I was the man who understood his worth. And that understanding changed everything. Looking back, that company party wasn't the catalyst for infidelity or betrayal. It was the mirror that showed me how long I had neglected myself. Marigold wasn't the replacement for what I lacked. She was the reminder that connection exists in its purest form when two people see each other without pretense. And as I sit here now, reflecting on those nights, I realize the most important choice I made wasn't to sit beside her. It was to finally see myself,